My name is Sally Evans, and I'm a member of the Spirit Catholic community here at New Branches, which is a three-faith community partnership. And I, along with Ann King, Ann, I got my readers on so I can't see you. There she is back there. We lead a group called Land Acknowledgement and Beyond. And it's a collaboration of people from all three faith communities. And we're thrilled to do this work. We're thrilled to be the organizers of this event this evening. And we greatly appreciate everybody who responded so generously to our invitation to gather this evening to have a conversation with Senator Mary Kunesh. Before we begin the program, we would like to share the land acknowledgement that was developed by our group and then adopted by New Branches. It was based on our research, it was based on conversations, and it was shaped by it is shaped by our continued learning. We offer it to remember and to acknowledge the land on which we live and work and worship, and to remind us of the commitment we all share to live beyond pretty words and performative statements. We acknowledge that New Branches is located on the ancestral land of the sovereign Dakota Nation, stolen through dishonest dealings and broken treaties. We honor as truth that this land was, is, and will always be sacred to the Dakota people and integral to their identity and their spirituality. With gratitude for the many ways that we continue to benefit from the wisdom and work of the Dakota people and those with whom they shared this land, we acknowledge the complicity of Christian churches in past and present injustices. These harmful acts range from genocide, ethnic cleansing, forced assimilation, and unjust exile to ongoing practices that oppress and marginalize Indigenous people. We commit to continued learning and truth-telling, and we commit to taking action led by our Native relatives that leads to justice for Indigenous people in our community and beyond. And now, mindful of the daily gifts that leaders, lawmakers, and first responders bestow upon us all through their willingness to work as public servants, despite the risks and the dangers their positions present, especially in today's political climate. With hearts that continue to grieve and grow, and with great hope that State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette will continue in stable condition as they and their daughter Hope walk the long road of recovery. We invite you into a moment of silence to honor State Representative and Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, and also for their children Colin and Sophie. Episcopal Bishop Marian Edgar Buddy offers the following wisdom as we look for ways to engage with courage and resilience. She says, sometimes courage is just showing up. In solidarity with strangers, united by resolve and hope. And it is in this spirit that we gather this evening, and we now turn our attention to our honored guest, Senator Mary Kunesh. thank you for being willing to join us this evening and for agreeing to share news of your continuing work on behalf of all of us, and for generously sharing your personal wisdom, thereby inspiring us to live forward, honoring our faith, our families, and our communities. And with that all being said, I'm going to turn things over to Virgil Mathewitz, a member of the Land Acknowledgement and Beyond group, who will now formally introduce Senator Kunesh.
Thank you, Sally. Just a housekeeping item for those that are new to the space. There are restrooms just to the right of the cafe area, and there will be refreshments and some dessert after the talk. So my name is Virgil Mathewitz, and as he said, I'm also a member of the Land Acknowledgement and Beyond group. I've known Mary since she was first elected to the House, and she was my representative, and then moved on to the Senate. And I've moved out of her district, but I still continue to receive her newsletter from the Capitol, because it's the most informative newsletter that I've seen from any of the legislators. So I very much appreciate that. Senator Mary Kunesh, a Standing Rock Lakota descendant, was first elected to the House in 2016 and then moved on to the Senate in 2020. She is the first woman of Native descent to be elected a Minnesota senator. Mary retired from her role as a public school library media specialist after 25 years of service, and is currently chair of Education Finance in the Minnesota Senate. Senator Kunesh is the author of legislation and was chair of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force in Minnesota, and created the first in the nation permanent office of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives in state government. Mary has served as an assistant majority leader for the DFL House Caucus, and currently holds the role of assistant majority leader in the Minnesota Senate. Also the first Native American to assume that role. Mary is the founding member of the Minnesota Native American Legislative and People of Color Indigenous Caucus, and Mary lives in New Brighton and is the proud mother of 3 adults and 2 grandkids. So without further ado, we welcome Mary to share her work with us.
I greet you, my relatives, with a warm heart and a hearty handshake. Thank you for inviting me here this evening to update you and let you know some of the work that I've been doing at the legislature along with the other legislators. As you can see, I am a Standing Rock descendant. I am currently in the Minnesota Senate. As the chair of Education Finance, I also sit on the Education Policy Committee, the Ag, Broadband, and Veterans Committee, and then also Environment. Oh my gosh, there's 2 more things to it. But I sit on a lot of different committees at the Minnesota Senate, and so I get a really wide variety of information from all of those different committees, and I'm really excited to do that. As Virgil said, I have 3 adult children, 2 granddaughters, and I have 2 boys on the way. My eldest daughter is expecting identical twin boys. Yeah. Twins run in my family, so she's the first one of that generation, so we get the plug. Before I go any further, I always have to kind of quiz folks in the audience. And my question to you all is, how many of you know how many federally recognized tribes we have in the state of Minnesota? Well, this is more hands than I have ever seen, I'm not gonna lie. How many do you think, or how many do you know? 11. Is that what everybody else was gonna say? We have 11 federally recognized tribes. Did you say this one is the one to do it? You guys? There we go. Yes, you would be surprised when I go and speak and ask that question, how often nearly nobody knows that answer, or they have some really random wild guesses. And I feel like that is a huge indicator of the issues that Indian country has experienced, you know, for the last 200 years, is just not even knowing what is around you. And of course, over here in Minneapolis, you have the largest urban community of American Indians, and then across the river in St. Paul. So we have 4 Dakota tribes, and they are all south of the Twin Cities. And then we have the Anishinaabe tribes to the north of us. And some of them identify as nations, some of them identify as bands, and you'll see some identify as Chippewa, and then we have Ojibwe as well. And those are their chosen identifiers. So it's important to know, you know, who your community is. Do I point it to you guys, or what do I do? There we go. Oh, yeah. So as Virgil said, I am the author of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. I created that task force when I was in the Minnesota House. I was a brand new legislator and really had no idea how to do anything. At first I thought maybe I would ask the governor to do a governor's task force, and then I realized that's not how it works. You just don't go to the governor and say, create a task force, would you please? So I worked with community, I worked with the tribes, I worked with domestic violence organizations, I worked with victims, I worked with advocates, I worked with governmental agencies, and we created the very first task force in the nation here in Minnesota. And out of that task force came a handful, about 12 recommendations. And the very first recommendation that we had from that task force was to create a permanent office in our state government to continue the work. It's one thing if you don't know, but once we are able to identify a lot of the issues and come up with some ideas and thoughts how to do it, we knew that we needed to continue to do the work for Indian country and for the trauma and the historic trauma that our Indigenous people have experienced for so long. So we did that. I created the permanent office in 2022, I believe, and that is up and running. They are using their time and efforts to open up cold cases, to support victims, to support victim families, to work with those issues that are happening in this current day and age. And I am always a little bit worried that should there be a change at the legislature as far as who's in control of the purse strings, that office might go away. And even like this last session when the dollars were pretty tight, you know, they're always looking for places to trim agencies, to trim departments. Fortunately, that did not come up on any of the lists. But a couple of years ago, I had a little epiphany as I drove to the Capitol. I was looking at I love to look at license plates, and I love to look at the letters and see whose initials I know has that initials. But, and it just hit me like I should create a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's license plate, because those dollars, you can allocate those dollars for wherever you want them to go. So I drove to the Capitol, I told my assistant my idea, and my intern went down to my committee hearing. In 2 hours I came back and they had a bill all prepared for me, which was pretty miraculous, you know. And so lo and behold, that year we created the Missing and Murdered Indigenous License Plate. 90% of the fees that are paid for that go directly to the office, and they have jurisdiction over those dollars to use them as they please. What was really cool is that they took my ideas, like in the bill I had to describe what I wanted that license plate, and I said I want a ribbon skirt on the right, and actually I was just going to have the red hand that you'll see that goes over the mouth, but this is even better because this is the icon for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives office. So we got them both on there. As of February of this year, it was the second most requested license plate and had generated over $90,000 for the office. So, yeah. So please, if you're wondering what you can do to help, next time you have to renew your license plate, please think about buying one of those and supporting it annually. And I got this idea from the assistant director at the MMIR office. She carries around a bunch of kerchiefs from the office, the MMIR office, and when she sees a car parked somewhere, she goes and she puts a kerchief on that car that has the license plate. And so I've started to do that too. So if I see your car out there with your license plate, you might get a kerchief from me. So next we are, oh, let's go back. I know. Is this the one I want? Is that the one right after the? Okay, great. So we're talking a little bit about some of the work that we've done this session. This was a really hard session in that in the House they are tied. And if you remember what the beginning of that looked like when they tried to figure out how they were going to share, and they tried to kick out Representative Tabke and take the majority, and then when that didn't work, they just decided to role play or start doing their own thing, which really wasn't legitimate. So that put us back, and in the legislature as a general, put us back a good month and a half, and then we lost our very dear Carrie Dietzick in the Senate, and we had to have another special election, and so we had a really late start to the session before we could really get down to the meats and potatoes of our legislature. But nonetheless, we were able to do some really good work. Mostly, we were able to contain and preserve a lot of the work that we had done 2 years ago that our Republicans counterparts wanted to dismantle. We did not. Probably one of the most heart-wrenching things was that we were not able to preserve full medical benefits for undocumented citizens. We were able to keep kids that are the children of undocumented covered by Minnesota Care, but not all of them, which was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever experienced in my life, to think that we are intentionally removing health care from people. We tried to negotiate and say, well, can we let the elderly and those with life-threatening diseases like cancer continue on? But the Republicans decided, no, we couldn't do that. So that was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to experience. So what did we do in education around American Indian issues? We made sure that, I'm looking at that. Oh, drumming. So some schools for quite a long time have allowed drumming at their graduation ceremonies and have encouraged it. But unfortunately, for some reason, some schools have decided no, they weren't going to do that anymore. If we let American Indians drum, then everybody's going to want to come in with their whatever they want to perform at graduations. And so many of them were making decisions not to do that. But we passed legislation that said if the American Indian Parent Advisory Council and every school that has 10 students or more should create this advisory council to help work with the students if that advisory council asks for drumming, then the schools are supposed to do that. We also made sure that mascot exemptions. So there are still some schools that carry the image of American Indians or names of American Indian that has American Indian connotations. They still have them in their schools. And I passed a law a couple years ago that says you have to remove those things. And the big pushback has been the cost of removal. So if some schools have those, in their gym floor, or they've got it on expensive electric signage outside or whatever it is, they've been pushing back saying it's too costly to do that. Or, we aren't being disrespectful. But when I've talked to schools and say, well, what does this even mean to you? And they're like, well, it's tradition. I'm like, how is this tradition? I mean, how do you honor whatever it is that you've got as your icon? If it's a chief, are you honoring that chief? How are you educating your communities about whatever that image is? And most of the schools are like, we don't. I'm like, then why do you think this is so important to keep it when you know it's offensive to a unique class of people? So they're getting the picture, but what we did this time around, we changed it so that if there is a school that would like to keep their mascot image or name, they have to get permission from the closest tribe to them. So they have to reach out to the tribe. They have to talk to the tribe. They have to maybe build a relationship with that tribe. They have to help that tribe understand why it's so important to them. And then the tribe can decide if it is okay or not. For example, down in Red Wing, they're the Red Wings. They have a very good relationship with the Prairie Island Band, and in fact, Red Wing has added Dakota language classes to their curriculum, and it is so popular, not just for Indigenous folks, but for all the other kids, that they have had to add more classes, in that way. And so if you have that good relationship with your school, then perhaps that's a really good thing. But if you don't have a relationship, or you have an antagonistic relationship, then we're going to ask you to work with that tribe and figure out how it can work best for all of you. The other thing that we did is, so in Minnesota, we have 4 BIE schools, Bureau of Indian Education schools, and those are schools that are supposed to be federally funded. So when Minnesota became a state, they established these schools. The federal government said they would take over the educating of these kids, but they never fully funded those schools. It was really deplorable. Even like 9 years ago when I was elected into the Minnesota House and I went and visited those schools, they were in deplorable shape. And so what we did, a piece of legislation that I passed is that, let's say the federal government, has a formula that gives $3,000 to every kid in those schools. Whereas in Minnesota, every kid was getting $3,500. So my bill, what I did is said, whatever Minnesota kids are getting, will make the difference between what the federal dollars are and what the state dollars are. So we were subsidizing that $500 per student. It's a little bit more, but that's okay. So we started doing that, and we saw some really incredible positive changes from that. But then, you know, there are grants out there that at the federal level, the state level, even some of the nonprofit organizations have grants that schools can apply for, but up until now, only public schools and charter schools were eligible for applying for those grants. Now we made those 4 BIE American Indian schools eligible also to apply for any of those grants as well. And then the other thing that we did is we exempted the ombudsperson for the American Indian families from any court fees. So the ombudsperson for American Indian folks look out for enrolled tribal members who most specifically have a problem with ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act. And those are special protections so that our kids aren't removed from our families the way they were during the boarding school era or for almost any reason. Our Native kids have been removed and still are removed at the highest rate of any other group of people. And they are detained in foster care longer and almost permanently than any other group of kids. And often were placed in adoption outside of the indigenous community. And so ICWA has special protections for that. 2 years ago, when ICWA was seriously under threat of being undone at the federal level, I spent a summer with a large group of community members and advocates and lawyers and whatnot, and we went through MIFPA, Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, which is like the Minnesota version of ICWA. And we went through it, updated it. We removed any reference to ICWA, because if ICWA went away and everything was tied to ICWA, that means all of that would be null and void as well. And so we updated the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act to make sure that those protections are in place. And this ombudsperson does that. She works with those families when there are legal issues around child removal or foster care issues or adoption. And she works all over the state. And in some jurisdictions, they were charging fees. And by our constitution, by our legislation, she should be exempt of any of those fees. But still, counties were still charging her, so we just said, no, you can't charge her for any of those legal fees. That was an important one, and we'd been working on that for a couple of years. Okay, the next one is, am I going up or down? There we go. I also created, I worked with an organization over here with the American Indians Health Center to create suicide prevention curriculum. And again, our population of indigenous people have the highest rates of suicide as well. There's a lot of historical and physiological and psychological trauma that almost every family carries, and unfortunately suicide is a big part of that. I think we are seeing a slight decline in suicide as we address more of those emotional issues, especially in schools, and have opportunities to provide those services. We also updated the Department of Corrections American Indian Cultural Program statute, and also included that in the Judiciary Public Safety Omnibus. There are so many studies and proven fact that when you use culturally relevant approaches to healing, to medicines, to mental health care, whether it's indigenous or not. It makes a difference when they are culturally relevant. And for American Indians, again, that means the ability to smudge, to carry their sacred tobacco, to hold sweats, and have sweat lodges, learn their language, all of those things. I mean, it wasn't so long that it was absolutely illegal to practice American Indian religion or to speak that language. And so this is, in the corrections department or in the area, this has been a really big one. And actually, it was the commissioner of public safety that brought me this bill. He's like, we need to update these things and make sure that they have access to all of those things. And then MIAC, which is the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and they brought us a bill for culture, arts, and history programs. They were looking for some additional money, but they brought it to me a little bit too late, so we'll work on that next year. And next slide. Let's go back one. There we go. And then, so for next year, a couple things that I have on my list. I created a bill that would create a Native American veterans statute that would go out on the grounds of the Capitol. Again, our Native Americans excel in their participation in the military. More Native Americans than any other population serve. It's a way to get a college education. It's a way to get yourself out of trouble if you're in a troublesome situation. Many of them feel a strong affinity for this land, for this country, and want to serve. But there's no recognition of the veterans at our American Indian veterans at our state capitol. So I worked with somebody, created a bill, only to find out that I was going about it in the absolute wrong way. I have to work with the grounds folks, and so I'm going to work on doing that correctly for the next year. We have the wild rice bill, which was a hugely controversial bill this session. We looked to protect wild rice in Minnesota by identifying its inherent right, and our Republican counterparts had a huge issue with that terminology. We were looking for ways to protect it from speedboats, from pollution, from a number of different things. Unfortunately, it got whittled down and whittled down and whittled down to basically just kind of a definition. But at least we got that into the environmental omnibus bill, and that gives us a little bit of a, foot in the door, and we will continue to work. And I just want to say thank you to Rise, who a number of people that were there. I think we had, 5 different hearings, at least 5 hearings, and they packed the committee rooms to speak to how important this legislation was, what it meant to the community, to show their support. And it wasn't just Indigenous people. There were a lot of non-Native folks that feel very, very strongly about this protection of wild rice. So we will continue to build on that with our advocates. And again, Chi Miigwech and Wopalatonka, we have one of their leaders here tonight. And we also were able to get a Red Lake land back. We weren't able to do that. That was another bill that I offered last year that was hugely controversial. Red Lake, if you know about it, they were cheated out of the northeast part of their lake, and they would like that land back, and they're able to prove that they were cheated out of it. That community up there went ballistic when this piece of legislation came forward. And so I've asked the Red Lake Nation to please start working with the community start building those relationships, helping them understand, you know, I would say that most people understand what happened, but most people that have reached out to me are saying that happened so long ago. It's not a big deal. Just let it be. You know, we're happy up here. The biggest argument is that their land value is going to drop, and nobody will come up there to fish, and all their businesses will go, you know, to pot. And I'm like, why is that going to happen? Because, you know, the tribe is taking. Well, nobody can answer that question. And one guy actually said, it's not about racism. I'm like, I think it is. And then another one that we need to work on is to, I propose tribal review, that tribes get to review any of the proposed mining projects before, when it's starting up, they're starting to talk about it, when they're starting to do the environmental studies. You have to bring the tribes into it. I don't know if you know that there's a huge underground deposit of helium in northern Minnesota. They don't know how huge it is. They just know it's big. And it's like really high-grade helium. I don't know how they measure all of that. And when those bills started coming to the Environment Committee, I asked, you know, have you spoken with the tribes? And they're like, oh, no, this isn't on tribal land. I said, but what if, you know, you don't know where this bubble of helium is? What if it's under one of the tribes? What if it's on tribally owned land? If it's going to, if those benefits are going to benefit, you know, the communities around the helium thing, are the tribes eligible for those sort of things? Of course, they hadn't even considered it. They hadn't really talked to the tribes, any of those things. And so my bill would say that you have to be conferring with the tribes on anything that might affect them. So that's another one of the pieces. They don't like that one either, but we'll keep working on that. All right. All right. The next thing I wanted to talk about, so that's some of the legislation that I still have around American Indian issues. There's some other things that we're kind of trying to cook up, but haven't quite got to. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about, and you can kind of read some of the things up there. The Trump administration has had some really serious issues, effects in Indian country. And a lot of those are around environment. A lot of those are around funding that comes from the federal government, that has come from the federal government because, in case you didn't know, when all these treaties were signed, most of the time, not only was there some kind of a financial aspect, but most often it was an agreement that the tribes, that the federal government would provide education, they would provide opportunity to learn a trade, housing, medical. All of these things are part of the treaties that the federal government has obligations. And the federal government at this time is trying to undo those or just ignore a lot, or defund it really is the way that they're going, is just don't put any money into those areas, and it's going to have a huge, huge effect. So we're talking about including public safety, education, healthcare, those cuts, concerns about federal government's role and commitment. The tribes are very, very worried about that. Of course, environmentally, I think we saw in the last Trump administration that they relaxed or removed a lot of the environmental protections around and in Indian country reservations as well, hoping to be able to go in there and pull those minerals out and make the most amount of money. You know, not not everybody is, feels like that's not the right thing. There are tribes that say, yeah, let's get in there, let's do this, let's get the money, let's get the minerals, and kind of forgetting or not taking into account the historical and traditional context of those lands. It always kind of surprises me when I meet Republican American Indian people and they think that our administration is looking out for them. The bureaucratic challenges, staffing shortages at the federal agencies that work with the tribes, they've been let go, or the staff has been reduced to a point where there's really nobody there to answer questions, to say, are we, for the tribes, are those dollars going to continue coming? There's nobody there to answer questions. When the administration, when Doge went in there and started, trimming everything back, I sit on a number of boards for American Indian organizations and nonprofits, and they right away were notified that whatever grants that they were eligible for, they're no longer eligible, that those dollars were frozen. They weren't going to be able to access them anymore. And then when somebody would call to ask questions about it, there was nobody there to answer those questions. And this is really, really detrimental to Indian country. So the other things is, let's see here. Can we get to the next one? There we go. Education, as I said, there are BIE schools here in Minnesota and across the country. And those schools also aren't sure what the funding is going to look like going forward. Usually they increase a little bit, not to the point where they should be, but they don't even know if those dollars are going to be coming, especially with colleges. The U.S. Department of the Interior submitted a budget request proposing to cut post-secondary program funding for more than $182 million from this year, just over $22 million for 2026. And that is really, really seriously, because some of these are land grant universities and colleges. These are colleges or universities that were built on lands that were stolen, borrowed from the tribes. And for example, the University of Minnesota Morris used to be a boarding school, an Indian boarding school. I don't know how many of you know that. And when the University of Minnesota took it over to create the University of Minnesota Morris, they agreed that any Native person who has direct lineage or can prove descendancy would be able to go to that school tuition free. And so, a couple generations of American Indian kids have been going to the University of Minnesota Morris with their tuition subsidized. My son did. I have nieces and nephews that went there. It made all the difference in the world for those students. I don't know if you remember a few years ago when the University of Minnesota regent made a comment that maybe University of Minnesota Morris was just a little too colorful. Do you remember that? Yeah. A lot of Native kids up there, and they don't, not just from Minnesota, but they come from all over because they know that they have the resources available. So now these universities are very worried about that. There are American Indian libraries and museums across the nation that receive federal dollars. Some of these libraries are located in universities. Some are academic or historical libraries, and they also have been notified of cuts and removal of funding and support from the federal government, and it's pretty serious. The other thing is that the Trump administration said that the library agencies now should be focusing on patriotism and promote American exceptionalism, and that would definitely undermine the work that the American Indian communities and academics have been and are working on and looking to the future. And that's not just for the American Indian libraries, but that's for all libraries and museums, and I think you've all heard and seen some of the horrific things that have been done with what is the performing arts in Washington, D.C.? Yeah, Kennedy. So that's some of the things that are really giving everybody a bit of a heartache. All right, the next one is, okay, and I did have to add this one. I didn't really want to add any positive impacts, but there have been. For one is that almost immediately the Trump administration recognized the Lumbee tribe, and they have been asking for federal recognition for a long, long time. With that recognition, they can create their own tribes, they can create their own sovereignty, they have their own jurisdiction, they can create their economic opportunities, all of those sort of things. And that was actually a really important one. Potentials for business opportunities. So, as I said, there are some American Indian organizations and businesses and tribes that feel that with Trump's mindset of business and building up economic opportunities, that there might be some opportunities, especially with his America First policies. And then, again, the focus on business and energy. The only problem with the energy is that we're not just sure what his goals are for energy. Is it clean energy? Is it, mine, like we have been, he's threatening to allow mining way up right next to the boundary waters, those sort of things. But there is a lot of uncertainty and instability. They seem to thrive on those sort of things, and it just means that for the tribes and the communities, they just don't know what's going to happen in a day-by-day status, and so that kind of paralyzes any of the plans that they have for their communities or their tribes going forward. Okay, next slide. All right, I just wanted to point out that this is the 100th anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. So up until 1924, American Indians were not recognized as American citizens. So my grandpa, who was born in like 1902, I think it was 1902, is that right, John? Yeah. My brother's sitting back here. He was 22 years old, and he still was not recognized as a citizen of the United States, even though he was born. He was an enrolled tribal member of the Standing Rock Nation. The other thing with the citizenship, so they passed the Citizenship Act, but it did not ensure voting rights. Even though you would think that it would mean that they could automatically vote. A lot of states had all kinds of laws and regulations that was preventing our American Indian folks from voting. In fact, it wasn't until 1960 that Minnesota removed all of their laws that prohibited American Indians from voting. So as it happens, a lot of our tribal members did not know that they could vote in elections outside of their tribal affiliation. A couple of years ago, when I was helping on Get Out the Vote, I went up north to a number of the tribes and talked to their communities and tried to get people excited, get them registered to vote. There were so many elders that did not know that they could vote in a general election or for their school board, for their county commissioner, for their representative or senator, even for the president or the governor. They had no idea that they could do that. And so it was pretty cool after that election how many of them contacted me or sent me pictures and said, I voted for the very first time. It was pretty cool. All right, next one. So here's some projects that I have been working on. This one is really super cool over at the Little Earth Agricultural Innovation Hub. So over behind Little Earth housing along the highway, there's a big barrier there. But right below it, the community has created the most incredible gardens. It's just fantastic. And they bring the elders into work to teach the younger kids, and the kids work on the garden. There are sacred tobacco and grasses that they grow. They hold all kinds of informational, how to prepare food, how to grow food, all of these sort of things. And then that food is absolutely free to the White Earth community right there. They produce a lot of fresh foods. Well, they want to create this hydroponic agriculture innovation hub, this huge building that would actually have huge tanks in there, fish tanks, and that the water and what do you call the fish? I don't know, crap. I don't know what else to call it, is really good for plantings. And so they want to create this incredible hub that would allow for outdoor and then indoor seasonal urban farming. And it's really important because that is a huge area of food insecurity, not only the cost, but trying to get to the grocery store and then having fresh fruit and the kind of things that are healthy for American Indians. They're teaching healthy eating, healthy living, all of those sort of things. And so that is a really cool project that I was invited to participate in, and so I'll continue to work on that. And then the next one this is another really cool one. This is located by Stone Arch Bridge, the old lock and dam that was there. All right, so that lock and dam was closed down, and then the land around it was actually privately owned, and then some of the land on the other side was privately owned, and that privately owned person basically gave those lands to this group, not Wakan-Tipi, Awamini, and they are trying to remove the man-made materials there, put it back into its natural state. Unfortunately, there was an island there called Spirit Island, and that was a very sacred island. That is where the Dakota women would go to have their children and to recuperate from there. When the mills were being built and when the bridges were being built, that island was destroyed, and the limestone, the rock, was taken to build those big walls that you see down there. And so again, this is another restoration and return, and the Dakota people are the ones that are doing this. If you look at that take that QR code, it'll give you a lot of really good information. But if you go down there, there are QR codes that will give you a lot of the historical context of that very sacred place. So that was another really cool thing that I get to work on. Over in St. Paul, there's the Wakan-Tipi down by the railroad pass and by the river, where that is being returned to its original state of being. And again, a great interpretive center that's going to be there to help with the education of the general public. I think somebody's doing the QR code. All right, next slide is, so in the beginning of this gathering, we had a land acknowledgement. And when land acknowledgements came out, you know, that was a really great thing. It's wonderful that folks are recognizing the historic context of the lands that we live on and take advantage of. But I think what was really important, or what was missing also, is like, so you make this acknowledgement, you recognize that there have been, you know, horrific things that have been done to our tribals, so what are you going to do about that? And so I always try to add a slide of some of the things that you can do. So purchase an MMIR license plate, support the Akins Pejuta Hub, that's the one over by Little Earth. Support and visit Uwamani, support domestic violence service centers, and there are like the American Indian Women's Resource Center here in the Twin Cities. Support and check out the American Indian Library Association at AILA Net. They have some really great resources on there, as well as lists of books that you might be interested in reading, some of the book awards. There's lots of really, really great information. Educate yourself, and please challenge yourself and attend a powwow. There are powwows going on every weekend, all weekend long, all over the place. And it's not just for the American Indian people. They welcome, and they'd love to see non-Native folks there. If you're not sure where, you can really just Google powwow near me, or there's a schedule. If you're not sure how to behave or what to expect, there are tons and tons of videos and websites that will help you understand the significance. So when you see somebody in their regalia, it's not a costume. So that you don't call it a costume, it's their regalia. They have spent hundreds of hours on that, many dollars, and their artistic talents on creating these regalia. And when they dance, you know, at a powwow, the different dances are very specific. There's the jingle dress, there's the fancy dance, there's the intertribal. That means anybody can come out. They might call it just for the Anishinaabe, and then they're just the Anishinaabe. But there's so much information, and you know, there's really good food there. Make sure you get fry bread when you're there, or an Indian taco. But please attend powwows, and you know, if you have questions, ask people. If you're going to photograph them, ask if you can photograph them first. They might even say, the announcer might even say it's fine to do that, but extend yourself and attend a few powwows. And then reach out to your legislators about issues that are really important, but given the horrific violence of the last couple of weeks, reach out to your legislator and thank them for the work that they do. I know there are a number of members in both houses that are concerned that should they continue to do this work, you know, the threat to themselves and to their families, to their communities as well. But if you can show a little bit of appreciation, I know they would appreciate that as well. But also just let them know of the things that you like and the things that you don't like. You can email them, you can write them a letter, you can write them a postcard, you can leave a voicemail. But try to get connected with your legislator. And if you like that legislator, next year, 2026, is election year for everybody. So figure out ways that you can support your legislator. And if they're not somebody that you can't support, find somebody to run against them and support that person. And then that's my last slide. That's my website on my state Senate email. Almost any senator, if you put SEN dot and then their first name dot last name at mnsenate.gov, that will get directly to them. And then Mary Kunesh for mn@gmail.com is my website. There's a lot more information on there about me and my campaign. But other than that, I just want to say Opi Latanka and Chi Miigwech, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. My name is Art Sobrel. We know that there are 11 recognized tribes. What about all the people who are not federally recognized? Where do they get support? How do they work?
Sure. So in order to receive federal dollars and federal support, you have to be recognized by the federal government. There's a band in Dakota people in Mendota that are not and have been really trying for a long time to get that federal recognition. Oftentimes there's the Native folks are dispersed across the United States. So for example, my family is Standing Rock from South Dakota. We don't live out there. We, don't receive any of the benefits from any of the tribe at all. So they're spread out. A lot of these tribal members are spread out across the country. If you are enrolled, you still have the benefits of your tribe. If you are not, the best thing you can do is hope that one day your tribe will allow for enrolling. There are some tribes that are unenrolling their members. There's such a thing as quantum that says X amount of blood, you're good, you're in the tribe, X amount of blood, you're no longer in the tribe. And just to let you know that is not a native origin measurement of blood or relativity to your tribe. That was something that the federal government created in order to basically water out your eligibility to own land on the reservation and take your lands from you. American Indian and dogs are the only one that are measured by quantum. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for all you've done to champion these issues. We really appreciate it. My question, we're here hosted by the Beyond Land Acknowledgements group, and you're talking a lot about land acknowledgements. I was wondering what you would say land back means, and if there were no barriers in Minnesota and you were looking to the future, what would that look like to you to see justice related to the land?
That's a really hard question, because if we were to give land back, that would mean the entire state of Minnesota, right? Pretty much all of the United States as well, and any kind of reparations that might go along with that. I don't believe that the tribes are looking for that. That isn't what they're asking for, but there are tribes that are very specifically looking for pieces of land or opportunity to those lands that they have been denied. So for example, Upper Sioux community, there was the Upper Sioux State Park that was actually a sacred piece of land to the Upper Sioux community and the Dakota people in general. And it was the site of a massacre and a fight during the the Indian Dakota War, and they turned it into a park. It was actually a burial ground, sacred burial grounds, and there were mounds there, and people died in that park, and they were, putting up teepees for people to camp in and riding horse trails through there. And at one point, the president of Upper Sioux, for about 20 years, he'd been asking for that land back. And fortunately, about 2 years ago, I was able to carry that land, that piece of legislation that returned that entire park back to the Upper Sioux community. And that was very, very significant because it was a big piece of land, but it was not a really big piece of land. And what a number of the community members in opposition was like, now we don't have a park. I mean, in those communities, they had tons of parks in there. Now this is people who come to camp or spend money, we're going to lose economic opportunities in those areas, which really, it didn't make any bit of a difference. So when we talk about land back, I think it's something that has to be tribally led and tribally requested. Work needs to be done with the community that surrounds those lands and with the legislature as well. Sometimes those lands, for example, White Earth, there's the White Earth State Park. It is 100% located within the reservation boundaries, and I have not yet found any legislation that allocated that piece of land to the state. So basically, they just took it and made it into a state park. So any of the timber that has been harvested from there, any of the money for hunting, fishing, ATV activity, any of those resources that it has generated from that park, not a penny of that has gone to the tribe, even though it is 100% located within their tribal boundaries. And so that's another one that we're working on, hopefully to happen. But again, a lot of community work needs to be done. There's a strong opposition to that as well. Yeah. Oops.
Thank you so much for coming on this night where all of us could have done 100 things, but we all chose to be here with
Thank
you.
you.
So thank you. I'm wondering, and this is a personal question, what would you say was the event or realization that sparked your passion for, I have to do this, I have to be involved in Indian advocacy?
Well, when we were growing up, I grew up in Sartell, which is just 8 miles north of St. Cloud, a tiny little town. My parents are both from St. Paul here. My mom is Native. My father was not, even though he actually looked very Native. He did, and he was a lawyer, he did pro bono work for the tribes up north. And he would take us up north, when he had to go meet with them, or he would be invited to feasts or powwows, and he would haul us kids up there. I come from a family of 13, and so anytime my mom could throw us all in the van and send us out with my dad was a good day for my mom. But, so he took us up there to the different reservations, and at that time, it was deplorable. The housing was, really huts. There was not running water or sanitation, dirt roads. When you drove down the roads, if there were people outside, oftentimes they would scatter into the woods. And I remember one of us asking my dad why they were running away from us, But if you know the history, the white people used to just pull up to the house and snatch the kids. And so whenever a stranger came, they would run into the woods. But I also have a sister who is an American Indian lawyer. She's worked for decades upon decades with the tribes, with NARF, Native American Rights Fund, which is like a lawyer consortium, and they help tribes all across the nation around issues. She worked with the Mashantucket Pequot. When they were finally federally recognized, she helped them build their council and their laws, and they have Foxwoods Casino out on the East Coast, which is, generated incredible amount of money for them. She's taught Indian law. She's worked for the Obama administration, for Biden's administration. She was this close to becoming the commissioner of Indian gaming for the nation. But then the election came and she didn't get that final confirmation, and now she'll be back to teaching Indian law. So she was a role model. I have an older brother who lives in Tennessee. He has worked very hard on preserving the sacred lands down in Tennessee. There are a lot of burial mounds down there that he fought hard to preserve, and he maintains them. And it's just always been, sort of a topic in my family. So when I was teaching and the opportunity came for me to run for office, being able to advocate for American Indians was a big part of it, but also for education for our teachers and our students, that was also a very important part of it. And then environmentally, where I grew up, we had a paper mill, we had a foundry at the end of our block, and we were surrounded by agriculture. And there was a time in the 70s where my dad said, you can't play in the Mississippi River anymore because of the pollution coming out of they used to just open up the gusher, and this raw pulp, wood pulp, would just flow into the Mississippi, and there was a dam right there, and if they opened the dam, it would churn that water so that you'd have this yellow foam that was just stories high. And then the foundry was just blasting anything. And of course, agriculture, all that fertilizer and weed killer, we couldn't play in the creek anymore. It was just like this. And I remember my dad being so happy when we created the Environmental Protection Agency. And so those are all some of the things that have, inspired me to do the work that I do. Yeah.
Hello, Mary, I'm Richard Podman. I've become part of a group called the Coalition for the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery.
Ooh.
And they are on the ground in Minnesota creating repair communities. And these are mainly allies, white people, but there's an organization of Native people, both Anishinaabe and Dakota, and they have founded Makochi Ikichupi, and it's now has 3 villages of land that they are using in native ways to build up these villages. I just want, I'm sure you've heard of it and know about it. I just wanted to bring it in front of other people.
Appreciate your alliance with the indigenous people and the work that you all do around those things. A lot of times it takes not just, a good heart to do that, but financial support. And then often, as you know, if a white person says something, people listen a lot better. So thank you for doing that. Yep.
Gambling. You think the tracks are asking for too much? I have no idea what they're asking for, but I'm just curious.
Who?
The gambling, the tracks, Canterbury Downs and Running Ace, because they want a piece as a gambling.
So,
yep.
So gambling was illegal in Minnesota, but because our tribes are sovereign nations unto themselves, they were able to create these casinos, and there is an agreement with the state of Minnesota, a compact with the state of Minnesota, that the American Indian communities would have exclusive rights to gambling. And I mentioned before the deplorable condition of these communities. It was the casinos that finally provided them with the economic opportunity to build decent homes, to provide a better education, provide the infrastructure for their communities. And of course, once other people saw the success of that, they wanted a piece of that as well. I personally don't think that we should expand the gambling opportunity to Running Aces or Canterbury Down. There was a very blatant violation with the electronic pull tab machines. There was an agreement that said, okay, if it looks, You know, it can't look like a real pull tab. It can't look like this. There were very strict regulations around that. And the machine owners, the companies just came in and put these slot machines appearing games as well as on like iPads and that sort of thing, which is direct violation of the compact. And so we had to walk that back. And that was another really hard one because a lot like the Lions Club and the VFW and, you know, all these charitable organizations were making tons of money on this, on these illegal gaming apparatus. And it was going to good things, you know, it was going to the hockey team and the New Brighton Farmers Market and all these good things. But when we said, you can't do that, that's illegal, they got very, very, very upset. And we can't, well, now we can't do this and we can't do that. So the state gave them some big tax breaks. We made some other concessions. But to answer your question, no, I don't think we should expand it outside of the tribes.
Hi, thank you so much for coming so soon after this huge loss
Yeah.
to our state and to your community.
Yeah,
And,
thank you.
And I'm curious and I'm most concerned about all across the board our ability to vote in 2026 and 2028 with all of the changes that have happened administratively and are happening across the country. And we're lucky to be in Minnesota with the laws that we have. But even with that, I know that there is underrepresentation of people that are eligible to vote on the tribes, and you talked about those changes. Have you thought, I mean, we're looking for, I think, opportunities for more allyship by showing up today. And what are your concerns about voting? I mean, you went and you inspired people to say, yes, it'll make a difference. But with all of the cuts and all of the you know, changes that are going to be occurring and lack of financial resources, what are some things that we could be doing and working on to make sure that tribes are able to fully participate and vote?
Well, that's a really good question, and we are very, when I say we, at the legislature and specifically the Democrats are very, very conscious of that and the historic disenchantment of American Indians. So one of the really cool things that happened 3 years ago is that we allowed for portable voting and registration vans that could go around up north around the tribes, around the reservation, and folks could come out and register there. They could, you know, drop their early voting ballot. They could even vote there if it was early voting. So that was one of the ways, because, you know, historically the ballot box is often very, very far away from where you live. I mean, if you would Google it, it might say 7.5 miles, but if you have to drive all the way around the lake and then down a dirt road and whatever, that is one of the barriers for sure. Sometimes they would put those voting places in inhospitable locations, so in the police department or the county jail. They would create very specific narrow hours where they would have a door open where you could vote. There were all sorts of different ways. Minnesota was not one of those that if you, you know, said you have to have like a 117 First Avenue North kind of address, sort of thing, and they would recognize the tribal ID as well as the state license, you know, those sort of things. So Minnesota has progressed quite a bit. The other thing is that it's really the county that decides where those ballot boxes are, and so it's important that the county works with the tribes to ensure that they have areas, or they have polling places that are accessible and safe, and then educating them. You know, like I said, I went up north to get out the vote. I feel like the the awareness and the responsibility and the opportunity to vote is now been heard pretty well in Indian country in Minnesota. And so I guess the next thing is to make sure that we're providing opportunities to get them there, that we aren't shortening early voting times, that we're reminding folks to get out and vote just like they do everywhere else, but in a more culturally sensitive way. And as I said, it's very top of mind to ensure that our tribal members are able to vote as well. Yep. Yeah. Split. Yes. Yeah, the question was about redistricting. So that was really interesting because I got to be on the redistricting committee. Most specifically because of, I wanted to make sure that tribes weren't split. When I was not elected, I had a daughter that was into politics, and she'd worked on a big campaign, and then she worked on the redistricting, so that would have been, 10, 11 years ago. And they needed community members to come in and look at some of these different maps and see what did they think. And so she invited me to go in one night, and I was looking at sort of the area of Little Earth, and I noticed that they had put a line right down Franklin Avenue that split Little Earth housing over here, and their community center was over here in a whole different district. Nobody really knew that, or nobody picked up on that. So when I pointed that out, they were like really kind of horrified. That was one of the reasons I wanted to be on the redistricting committee. Plus, I find it really fascinating. And so I sent a lot of information out to the tribes to say, we're going to be moving around the state. We're going to be in your area for hearings. Get somebody out there. We're going to be talking about here. You can send in messages or emails or comments, and try to get as many of them involved in it. And one of the ideas was, especially up north, was because those districts are so huge, they were cutting them up into different districts, which really diluted the voting power of the tribes. And I said, what if you all got into one district? How about suggesting that? They did do that, which was really, really great. But, we never know the unintentional consequences because, like I said, we have lots of Republican American Indians. We have lots of Democrats. And sometimes it's they're kind of, not feuding, but there are issues, and when you put them all into one district, there's still other representatives and senators out there that aren't being affected by that, or if they're in an area that has environmental issues and they are not represented by a representative that is sensitive to that, then that can kind of work on the contrast. But this is the first time it's happened, and so learning a lot. Yeah.
Thank you for being here, Senator Kunesh. I'm here.
There you are.
I have a microphone. Our population in the state is aging, and it's been referred to as a coming tsunami of aging people. I attended some hearings on the task force on aging this couple years ago, and I know this session, there was something passed that gave an administrative director to the Department of Administration to work on a more comprehensive look at aging. I'm just wondering if the tribes are concerned about aging Native American peoples, or if what might be going on there.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not in the Health and Human Service committees. I was when I was in the House. But I would say when it comes to our American Indian community, you know, they have, because of poor diets and lack of medical attention, our elders, our older generation, have a lot more health issues than, you know, maybe a little bit younger generation. But there is a lot of concern, especially with the federal government now, because we have the Department of Indian Health that is federally funded, and that's where a lot of the primary care for our tribes comes from. Even here in Minneapolis, over at the American Indian Health Department or Health Clinic, those are primarily funded by federal dollars, and there is a huge concern about that. I think the best thing that's been happening is that there is more attention to diabetes and healthcare and healthy eating, which has created maybe a little bit healthier generation going forward. And those are some of the folks that still understand and speak the language, were brought up in the culture of things. And so as they are aging, I think the biggest concern is losing those cultural, seasoned culture people in their community. But, you know, addiction is still a big issue. Alcohol, other addictions is huge. And we just have to continue to work through that to ensure that, like, every generation, across the state, as folks are aging in their communities with those issues, they're not all unique to just American Indian folks. But I think the most important thing is trying to preserve them so that we can get as much information and education from them. Yep.
We have time for about one more question.
Oh, there's one right up here.
Thank you. I appreciate your being here. As a brand new resident of Minnesota, I just moved about 3 weeks ago from New York State, the land of the Haudenosaunee people.
Welcome.
And my question is broader, in a sense, than just the indigenous issues or the issues of all marginalized people, but it's actually about the legislative body and what, if you folks are having conversations at all about the extreme polarization, how we move forward with the inability to even talk with each other, the inability to pass legislation, not on the merits of the issues, but because we vote so closely along party lines and have difficulty engaging. And so I'm wondering if you could share with us if those kinds of conversations are happening broadly in the Minnesota Senate, in the House, and how you folks have perhaps talked about bridging some of that so that we can move forward rather than continue to sit in our respective places.
So Minnesota is unique right now in that the House is evenly divided, and that basically forced both the GOP and the DFL to work together to get anything done. We had to balance a budget this year. We had to fund government. And we had to fund education and healthcare and all of those things. So because of that, from what I'm hearing of our House members, is that really forced them to have to sit down and talk about the issues, talk about the goals, talk about where they're going to go, negotiate. And so a lot of the House members are seeing that there is a positive that's coming out of that. Now, should one party take the majority, I don't know that that would be long-lasting. I mean, I know a lot of legislators that I can sit down and, you know, shoot the breeze with, and I walk away going, God, I kind of like that person. They're kind of cool, you know, that kind of thing. But when you get to issues in front of the camera or at the legislature, it's a horse of a different color. I mean, I'm the chair of Education Finance, and I have told my GOP members, please bring me good bills. You bring me good bills, I will hear your bills, make sure that they're focused on the student and the teachers and this sort of thing. We have members that are far, far right and, pretty far left as well, and there are folks that are, just their feet are set in cement. It's my way or the highway. But we're finding, you can't really get things done bipartisanly if you're not going to be open to those conversations and building those relationships. I mean, we passed incredible legislation 2 years ago. There's nothing that would prevent, should the GOP members take over and have the power, that they wouldn't undo everything that we did. But hopefully, with what they see is happening is positive, or because of the relationships that we're building, that might not happen. But it really does, it's a mindset, and there are people that are open to it, and there are people that are absolutely not. They don't want to hear, see, or speak to, that other person over there and there are some pretty wonky people that you just, really. But, it's up to that individual legislator to build those relationships. And, hopefully we get there. I don't know. And you had a question.
I had a question. I sat in a hearing, this was a couple of years ago, and there were mostly Native people on the, as the speakers. And what had happened is that some of the land that they had, they were losing for tax forfeiture. And there was a big argument about, we're going to take that land away from you then, because you didn't pay your taxes. And there was never anything resolved. And I have thought about that for the last 2 years. Did they get to keep their land? How was that ever resolved? And it was a couple years ago, so maybe you're not familiar, but it was such vitriol. It was really depressing to watch.
I'm afraid I don't know that specific one, but I know in legislation that I have carried over time, that says that if there are county lands that do go into forfeiture, especially if they connect or they're on the border of a reservation, that the tribes have the first right to purchase that. But I don't know specifically about what you were talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. I learned a lot tonight, and I hope I'm sure everybody else did as well. And thanks for the conversation, too. So a round of applause to Mary.
And this is very small. We know you do what you do because you love and care about the people that you serve. But we just wanted to send you home with something cheery, and maybe it'll add color to your space.
Absolutely. Well,
So thank you very much for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we hope you'll join us out in the commons, as we call it, for some beverage and light treats, and before you go along your way. Thanks again for coming tonight.
Thank you.
We can put that on that so you don't get all wet.
Oh, I think it'll be fine.
You think you'll be fine? Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. That was perfect, though. You could control it from back there.
Right?
Yeah. Of course, now it's working.
You're